Dial for Martin is a really good and often quite intense episode of Frasier. This is the third episode of the sixth season. It's directed by Ken Lamkin, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And it starts off rather dramatically with Frasier and Martin shouting, yelling at each other. It's not nice to see. I don't like to see them arguing. They both apologise really quickly, and we realise that they're just getting at each other because Frasier obviously not working. Martin also spends a lot of time around the house. They're basically sick of each other's company, which is fair enough. Frasier's mood lifts a little bit when he sees that there was a note from a woman called Rebecca, and then he gets annoyed that Martin had waited so long to make him aware of the note, and they start to fight again. We then cut to Cafe Nervosa. Martin's there, Roz comes in, and they start talking, and Roz points out that at one point Martin's daughter-in-laws were Lilith and Maris. Now, I love Lilith, but at the same time, that's a pretty difficult situation. That being said, it's not like he ever really knew Lilith in any great detail when she was actually still with Frasier. That was certainly during the time, or around about the time, when Frasier was of the mind that his father was dead. It's Cheers stuff. Absolutely love talking about it. Not necessarily relevant to Frasier, the TV show. But nevertheless, even though he didn't see Lilith a lot, those were his daughter-in-laws. And Ross comes up with an idea that maybe Martin could go and stay with Niles for a bit, just to give both himself and Frasier a bit of a break from one another. Niles then comes in. Martin suggests this, and Niles is initially not enthusiastic about this, and he points out that his building doesn't allow dogs. And Martin's not going to move there without Eddie, so looks like it's not going to work out. But Martin can kind of see through this, and he happens to mention that he might just have to find a place somewhere big enough that Daphne could stay there. And Niles happens to have a change of heart. Maybe he can overlook the dog rule. And we then cut to Frasier happy he has a date with Rebecca, and Martin then tells him that he's moving in with Niles for a few months, and everything seems quite positive. He then tells Daphne about this, obviously so Daphne can move with him, and Daphne decides it's time to say that maybe she should move on. Her work with Martin is done, and she explains if Martin can make it up and down the stairs in Niles's place, then she's not really needed anymore. And Niles's reaction to that in particular was rather brilliant, and it seems like Martin and Niles are going to have to live together with Eddie, but without Daphne. And we have this beautiful moment when Eddie just jumps up into Niles's knee, and it's so adorable, and I love Eddie. I love him so much. We then cut to Niles's apartment, and Eddie is just walking in circles on the top of the table, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I love it. Daphne is on the phone to her agency, the agency to try and find other jobs. Currently, nothing available. Frasier then comes over, and he has a squeaky toy for Eddie, and he's also brought over Martin's chair. So things are not going very well for Niles, and then it goes from bad to worse, because actually Daphne has an opportunity. She finds out that there's a job to help a woman with brittle bone disease, and this is just too much for Niles. It is absolute chaos, and the next thing we hear is this tremendous clatter, and I hate it, because Martin's fallen down the stairs, and I absolutely hate it. There are several times in this episode where we see Martin falling over and in pain, and I really do not like it. And we find out that Martin fell because Niles kicked his cane out from under him. And Martin didn't think Niles did this on purpose, but Frasier kind of suggested that maybe his unconscious did it. And Frasier kind of suggests that when you're faced with all of these difficult things and you don't know how to cope with it, your unconscious steps in and tries to, I don't want to use the word rectify the situation, but change it so that it's easier for you. And Frasier doesn't think that this is actually the case. It was more of just a passing comment. But then Martin starts to think about this, and then he nearly sits on some scissors that Niles had left somewhere, and it seems like he's actually in danger. We're then briefly with Frasier in his apartment, and he walks in the door, and we get to see a shot of the whole room. And it's just, with the chair not being there, I absolutely hate it. It's genuinely quite an emotional episode at times. And we know Martin is alive and well and relatively safe. But still, the image of his chair no longer being there is just, it's a little bit more than I'd like to have seen in this episode. And we're then back in the apartment with Niles and Martin. Niles has been putting some stuff up in the bathroom to help Martin. I genuinely think Niles was trying to be helpful. I genuinely think he was looking out for Martin, but he's not exactly great with DIY. Martin leans on one of the railings and it falls, and subsequently he nearly falls. And obviously this is really when Martin's starting to think that Niles' unconscious is trying to kill him. And Daphne then comes home and she got the job. She starts basically immediately, and Niles becomes really sinister. It becomes really dark, and I do not blame Martin for starting to fear for his life, because Niles says he can't let her leave. He has to find a way to make Daphne stay, and Martin is terrified. Very powerful, very effective, very, very well done. And Martin turns up at Frasier's and he says, about Niles, I think his unconscious is trying to hurt me. And Frasier tries to reassure him that this isn't the case, it was just something he came up with. And then Daphne comes over. She's really emotional. She comes over to get some stuff she'll need for her job, her new job. But she becomes really emotional because she has to leave. And it's an interesting position with Daphne. Because if she loves them so much and doesn't want to leave, why is she doing it? And I think it actually shows just how good of a person she is. Because she realizes that she can help somebody else, even if it means leaving something and a place and people that she really loves. And that shows that she's such a good person. And honestly, if I were in her situation, I wouldn't leave. But I don't like change. That being said, I absolutely detest change of any kind. But I guess the point there is that Daphne is a way better person and a way more selfless person than I ever would be. Niles then turns up, and it's a bit chaotic, and then they're outside as Frasier is getting ready for his date, and outside the apartment, and we hear Martin scream, and it turns out Daphne had kicked his cane and he fell to the floor. So clearly she doesn't want to leave but doesn't know how to deal with this, so her unconscious, in theory, found a way around it. And I don't like hearing Martin scream. I don't like seeing him on the floor, but they did manage to pick it up with some comedy as Rebecca arrives at that exact moment. The elevator doors open, and, well, we get some comedy because Frasier is basically trying to salvage his date while ignoring his father in pain on the floor. It doesn't sound funny, actually, when I'm saying it, but in the moment, it is. We managed to pick things up, and Frasier's response, and quite rightly, Rebecca didn't want anything to do with this. She's played by Laura Harring, and it takes her a couple of seconds to realise that if this is what Frasier is like, she doesn't want to date him. And we then cut to the final scene with the apartment, and the chair, Martin's chair, is being brought back in. Daphne is lying on the sofa on the phone. Eddie is circling the table, which I love it so much. And then it kind of pans across the room, and we end with Frasier leaning against the wall, utterly devastated at everything, drinking to, I guess, forget everything. It would have been better at that moment if Niles had been there. I don't know what Niles could have been doing, maybe looking at Daphne, but I feel like it would have just been a little bit better if Niles had also been involved in that final scene. But it obviously didn't affect my enjoyment of it. It's a really solid episode. Personal highlights would have to be, well, Eddie running circles around the table. On top of the table, actually. I absolutely love it. And I guess how powerful the more sinister, darker moments are with Niles kicking out Eddie's cane, Martin's cane, and when he said, we have to find a way to stop Daphne leaving. It's so powerful. It's so sinister. It's not necessarily that I didn't enjoy seeing Martin in pain or the thought of Niles hurting Martin, but I thought it was very, very well done. So I have to praise it, even though it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And, of course, Eddie jumping up into Niles' knee, mostly because I'm jealous. Jack Russells are my favourite, or one of my favourite dogs, maybe top 3. And I just want to cuddle a Jack Russell whenever I see Eddie. So some really great Eddie moments, really great performances, of course, very strong narrative, a little uncomfortable and emotional at times, but nevertheless, Dial M for Martin is very, very well done.